Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. We want to welcome you to our session. Today, we have developing effective courses and lesson plans. And this is part of our webinar series in professional development for the West Texas Fellowship Program. And we will have Dr. Flores facilitating today's session. And I know that we are all familiar with him because of the program, or maybe because you've had him for a class. But here's a little bio so you know a bit more of what Dr. Flores has done over the years at UTEP and other institutions. So he received his PhD in electrical engineering from ASU, Arizona State University, and his BS and MS from UTEP, also electrical engineering. I listed some of the courses that he teaches. You can definitely reach out if you're interested. And Dr. Flores has served as Dean of the Graduate School and Associate Dean of the College of Engineering. And some of the programs and initiatives that he has been director, project director, or PI, principal investigator, are the MIE initiative, the iStar STEP program, and the Puentes program. And currently the UT system LSAM, which Bridge to the Doctorate is part of, and of course our Aspire Alliance. And also some of the interesting awards and achievements are listed there. So Dr. Flores never likes to brag, but we will do that for him. And the highlight of this is that he received the White House Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering Mentorship under the Obama administration. So a lot of stories about that one. And of course, the main, one of the main characteristics that Dr. Flores is well known for, I would say internationally, is that he has managed a multi-million STEM research and training portfolio. So very proud to be part of the team and to conduct some of these efforts along many, many years that I've had the pleasure of working for and with Dr. Flores. So let's continue then. And Dr. Flores, you want to start?
Absolutely, Sarah. Welcome everybody, and Sarah, thank you for your kind introduction. You've managed to do it again. This is a way of making sure that nobody pays attention to me when you look all the accolades and people start saying, oh no, right, what did I get myself into? But thank you anyways, I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
To everybody, good afternoon. I hope you are doing well. It's Friday. Congratulations. We made it to the end of another week, and all you have to endure now is a presentation by me, and we're going to talk about a topic that cannot really be discussed at length in 1 hour. I think this is a topic that we could spend a whole semester discussing details of. And the bottom line is this is going to be an activity that you will be engaged in if you decide to pursue a career in academia for the rest of your career. Planning your courses is always a virtuous cycle of learning. You plan, you execute, you evaluate, and you improve, and then you do more planning, you add more executing, etc. So this is the main idea here is that you engage in this cycle and you always go through an improvement process. So I'm going to try to cover 10 ideas. So the first one has to do with course description, of course. Sarah? Thank you. So one of the things that you know already, of course, is that every course has a catalog description. And that catalog description has actually been vetted by a number of authorities. Those authorities start typically with a curriculum committee in a department or a program. And it goes through a chain of administrators that typically reaches the coordinating board of the state. Here in Texas, we have a Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and that board is in charge of ensuring that all programs across Texas are of quite high quality. This board looks not only at what happens in terms of curriculum at universities, but also looks at community colleges as well. So every course will typically have a number, a catalog number associated with it, in a brief description. The brief description is, in the case of a course at a university, typically approved at the departmental level. If it's a course at the graduate level that a professor is interested in teaching, and the professor has the ownership of the course, then the professor is in charge of writing down the description. In a community college, the process is very different, and since there is a common curriculum across the state, all courses have the same number. That is math course that is taught at a community college in El Paso or at Midland College or somewhere else in Texas, they all have the same number, and the description doesn't change. So it is the responsibility of the professor who's teaching the course to maintain the integrity of the content that is going to be delivered in the course. So the course description is nothing but a distilled statement of the content of the course. And I use the word covered because I want to discuss that in more length. And that's actually a term that we really don't want to talk to or use in our jargon. We just need to be aware that there's a lot of conversations going on over what is covered and what is not covered in a course. So Sarah, you can go to the next slide. I would appreciate it. Okay. When you are thinking of developing a plan for a course, or when you're even looking at the development of a lecture plan or a lesson plan, you always need to keep in time and keep in mind what it is that you're trying to deliver and what it is that you want the students to learn from it. Okay. Typically, you want to make sure that students remember something about the topic that is being discussed, but more importantly, you want to advance that the understanding that the students have. So you definitely want them to remember and to understand the concepts and methods that you discuss with them. You also want them to apply certain procedures. So for instance, if you're talking about famous equations like the energy is equal to the mass times the speed of light square, you want students to understand, to remember the equation. First of all, you want them to understand what that equation means. And what do we mean when we say that the energy of an object is proportional to its mass and is related to the speed of light. You want to talk about that and with the principles behind that. And of course, you want the students to exercise their abilities, their math abilities, and be able to compute numbers, right? But more importantly, you would want at some point in time for the students to analyze their own work. These different levels is what we call a taxonomy of knowledge. And this was proposed back by Dr. Bloom in the 1950s, and it's something that we still use today because it's very useful for us to keep in mind where we want our students to be by the end of a particular lecture. For example, do we want them to remember? Do we want them to understand? Do we want them to apply? Or do we want them to go even beyond and do analysis and synthesis and the highest level of this taxonomy, which is the evaluation? Typically at the undergraduate level, we work at the first two levels. So our learning outcomes for a particular course would be to remember, to understand, and to apply. For graduate courses, we want to go beyond that, and we really would like our students to be able to evaluate pieces of work associated with the topic that we discuss in a course. Again, at the graduate level, of course, there's a different expectations than we would have at the undergraduate level. So at the undergraduate level, we focus on the lower three categories or tiers of this pyramid of knowledge. Sarah? We also want to have a very good idea and make sure that students understand what it is that we're expecting from them in terms of reading requirements and other things that they need to look into. For example, we would like for them to buy or acquire a copy of a textbook that is going to be used. Nowadays, there's a tendency for our students not to buy textbooks that are the type that you hold in your hands. Many instances our students, and I'm sure you do too, uh, acquire textbooks that are in electronic format, which is fine. The more important thing is to make sure that the students have that textbook available to them at any given time, especially during class. You want to encourage them, if you're going to have a face-to-face session, to bring the book with you, or to bring the tablet or laptop, so that they can access the textbook right away. There may be other additional literature that you want to share with them, so you might want to upload that to the teaching platform. In our case, it's Blackboard, but you might be using a different platform depending on the college that you would be teaching at. They will always give you access to that platform, and the expectation is that you would upload information such as outlines or articles, or maybe even the presentations that you're using for the course, and any additional notes that you may think is important for students to have access to. Of course, nowadays you want to make sure that students have uh, uh, access to other resources, such as websites, videos that you may generate, or that other people may generate, and you found out about them through a conference, or perhaps through a colleague that has identified some videos that they think are of high quality, and whose content is reliable. I think one of the most important aspects here is that if you're going to share information, make sure that it is reliable, and let students know what is reliable. Sometimes I get students who have provided or have looked for answers in answers.com. It's an interesting website and you can post everything, but the question really is that information reliable? And in most cases, it isn't. So you want to teach your students how to access reliable resources. So next. Um, Now, let's talk a little bit about course content, okay? Course content gives students a sense of direction regarding the course by outlining the rationale for the course, and also framing a brief overview of the key knowledge and skills that we expect the students to learn, okay? Always keep in mind, right, that content is not meant to be covered. The idea that I am covering so much content is outdated. Really, what we want to do is uncover that material. We want students to become aware of the material, and we also need to realize that the students come, as you do, with previous knowledge. Uh, our brains are not empty vessels, rather they're there for us to learn, and we want to share that what we have learned with our students, and we want to provide mechanisms by which students learn. So this idea that we're pouring knowledge or that we are the repositories of knowledge is quite antiquated, and really it's not consistent with current methodologies for teaching and learning. Next. Now, when you are preparing a course or a lesson, part of your plan is to determine what teaching strategy you're going to be following for the semester or for a lecture by itself, or perhaps you want to do this over a week. So when you're doing this, you need to keep in mind that there are different learning strategies out there. They're fairly well known. They're very well documented. And the most important thing is that they are evidence-based. In other words, there is data, or there are data that support the fact that these strategies do work if they are well implemented. Now, implementing them means that you have to practice. And as with everything else, practice makes perfect. The first time that you implement a strategy, in the first semester that you teach, your implementation is probably not going to be flawless. It will have some flaws. You are also a learner of the process. So over time, you will be improving. So do not get frustrated if you don't get it perfect the first time, okay? That essentially is a myth. And what's important is that you try your best. And by the end of the day, you say, okay, that lecture was the best I could do now. And I'm going to try to do better. You know, sometimes, like nowadays with technology, we have technology hiccups and things don't work. And the lecture can be ruined by some aspect of the technology that is not cooperating. So if that is the case, well then, you know, the best thing we can do is apologize to the students and then try better, and give the students always resources so that they know that you're trying your best. Now, you should also understand that there are achievement gaps in our student population. You know, some students are better prepared than others. And this is particularly true in community colleges. You need to understand your student population. You need to understand where they come from. You need to understand where the majority stands. And you have to adopt a strategy for effective teaching that makes sense for that particular student population. Okay, if you have a group of learners who are more apt to do mathematics than they are to do reading, you know, don't emphasize reading necessarily. Try to combine your activities so that, you know, if there's a lot of math involved, that you let them exercise that math. And then, of course, you want to make sure that they can communicate effectively. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to make readers out of them overnight, because that's just not going to happen. They don't have the skills, right? Those skills get developed over time. You also need to differentiate within a particular class your students. Some students are going to be better prepared. Some students are going to have different sets of skills. And you want to make sure that you take advantage of that. So everybody, you know, you have a mix of students, take advantage of that mix of students, and let those who are good at communicating verbally to talk, and let those who are better, for example, at doing things with their hands, also to have an opportunity to share what they have done. The idea is that nobody gets left behind. That's why we have an emphasis on differentiation. You should also assess the results of your strategy and make improvements along the way and for future offerings. Okay, so assessing your own work is part of teaching, and keep that in mind. Sara, next. So what do you do with your time, the time that you're going to have during the semester or for a particular lecture? You know, in a typical semester, there are 15 weeks. There are 40 contact hours. And I want you to remember this number, 40 hours. You typically ask students to study 80 hours in addition to the 40 contact hours that you have with students. And then you'll have time for tests, okay? Nowadays, we can set the test offline so that students are, you're not spending that time with the students just watching over them. There are some professors that don't trust their students, and I think that says more about the professor than it does about the student. And so it's important for you to feel comfortable with the idea that you're talking to adults and that they have an interest in learning, and with that assumption you can do much more than if you were to say, well, I don't trust my students, I think they're going to cheat, and I think that's just terrible, so I need to watch over them every step of the way. I think we waste a lot of energy and emotions doing that. I'd rather think that most human beings are good people, and that if they're enrolled at a university or a community college, it's because they want to be better people, and they want to learn, and they want to enhance their standards of living. So what do you do with your time? So for instance, what I like to do in day one of the when we start the semester is I like to get to know them a little bit. Especially when we have face-to-face interaction, I really spend a whole session just doing that. And for me, it's time for that I use to get to know their names and get to see their facial expressions and learn a little bit about them. You can do a silly icebreaker that can go a long ways. There's many icebreakers that you can use to get students engaged. I also use that time to set expectations, and I tell them, okay, these are my expectations. I expect this of you, and I list the expectations. But I also like to hear what they expect from me. If you open up and you ask the students, what do you expect from me? What do you think you're going to get out of this course and out of your engagement with me? Then you'll be surprised as to what students are expecting. And then you can clarify whether those expectations are realistic or right on target, or they aren't realistic, and perhaps that's something that needs to be corrected right there. Okay. You also may want to spend some time forming teams if you're going to have a significant number of activities during the semester with those teams. And you also, for example, if you're doing things online, you want to set up discussion rooms and help students figure those out. Some of my students don't like discussion rooms, but when we're doing things virtually, they rather have a one-on-one conversation with me, and that's fine with me. But I think that discussion rooms are a great opportunity for students to talk to each other and to discuss among themselves, especially when people are isolated like we are right now during the pandemic. It's important to give students opportunities for or to discuss among themselves. You should always have an activity, and you should always think about performance measurement. How are you going to have managed these activities during the lecture and throughout the semester? Okay, you should also always think about how you're going to wrap up the day. You typically during a lecture, you don't have just one activity. You may want to have two activities. So perhaps you have a short 10-minute discussion, then you engage in an activity, then you have another short discussion and go through another exercise. I really like to do this because I know that my students like numbers. right? You know, in other areas in STEM disciplines, the interest may be somewhere else, but you know, when we use numbers in engineering, we typically we know what that number means, and if the student is not familiar with a number, you know, one thing is to calculate a number and get 1 or 10 or 100. It can mean several things, so it's important for the students to actually process that. So just, you know, when some people criticize the fact that we are saying, oh, we're emphasizing numbers, and so, well, what we are emphasizing is a discussion of what those numbers mean, and that's very different. Okay. uh, and at the end of the session, you may want to wrap up the day and with a topic, a particular exercise, and then you, at the end of the semester, you would have, you know, examinations. So those are all possibilities. Sara, next, please. So depending on how you're going to be teaching, whether it's a face-to-face or virtually, you may have different lesson plans. Okay, but you should always, at the beginning of the class period, try to state what it is that you're talking. You know, it may, you know, perhaps you didn't see them, your students, for a couple of days. Their mind may be somewhere else. So it's always important to say, you know, we're going to continue our discussion on this or that topic, and today we're going to emphasize something in particular. Sometimes just asking the question, you know, what is it that you feel is the most important topic that we have talked so far? Uh, what I like to do with face-to-face lessons is, after setting a goal, you know, I give a short lecture, and I do mean a short lesson. Okay, you don't want to talk for 50 minutes. You want to talk for 10 minutes, and then make sure that the students are understanding what you're saying. What we know from psychology is that after 10 minutes, and I have exceeded my 10 minutes, obviously, in this webinar, but what we know from psychology is that after 10 minutes, students tend to tune out. And that's when it's a good time for you to engage them with some sort of activity. Give them an assignment, uh, have them work at it, or, you know, given an opportunity to discuss, you know, or to ask questions. And then at the end, you should always have some sort of end of class activity. Okay, this is much more important with freshmen and sophomore students than it is with junior and senior students who have different expectations. But with a freshman student population and the sophomore student population, having end of class activities tends to be highly beneficial. If you have a virtual lesson plan, then of course you want to set the goal again. You want to have a mini lecture. You want to state a problem, and then you can have breakout groups. Now, this is what we do now in webinars, right? This is the format that we actually use for this webinar. So we pose a question, we ask people to think about it, we break out, and then we bring everybody back and then summarize what it is that we have learned during the day. Sarah, next. So as far as lesson plan outlines, you know, here's an idea, and I tend to break things into not days, not one day, but 2 days or a week, the equivalent to a week. So if I start the 1 week with a particular question or topic, then I like to discuss new content, and I assign an exercise. You know, I'll always pause for questions. A good practice is to, if you're going to ask for a question, if you ask a question, you should always uh, give students time to prepare that question. They may not have fully articulated the question in their minds, so giving them about 20 seconds to articulate that question is important. Sometimes the silence is uncomfortable, but it's not really silence. It's time that's where the students are thinking about what it is that they understand and they don't. They're trying to sift through the information. So that time is important. So 20 seconds is the norm. And if you don't hear any questions, then perhaps you can ask yourself a question and then to answer that so that, perhaps that can stimulate additional questions. Okay. Let them learn. Give them time to learn. Learning does not happen instantaneously. It takes time for those neurons to make connections, and it typically takes a whole semester to really understand a topic. So if you know this very well, that if you are able to learn the material quickly, that's because you're gifted, but not everybody is going to have that gift. Okay. At the end of the session with freshmen, I always love to ask muddy questions. What are there any muddy points? Write them down on a piece of paper, and then we'll have an opportunity during the next session to discuss those muddy points, which is day 2, of course. And then you go through the same cycle that you would go through in the first day, but the second day you're now addressing things that the students may or may not have understood in the previous session. I hope that this gives you an idea of how to plan your lessons. Sarah, next. Okay, this is my favorite one. It has to do with exams and quizzes because we have a tendency to do one thing over another. We know that students have a certain degree of knowledge that is ingrained in their brains. But however, how they perform, in other words, how they actually use that knowledge may be something entirely different. I like this story from Alice in Wonderland when the queen asks, can you do addition? And what's 1 and 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 1? And Alice said, I don't know, I lost count. And of course, the Red Queen interrupts saying, she can't do addition. We tend to be like that sometimes, but when we are professors, we assume that, if we tell them this is a rule for something, and then we immediately ask for them to perform, they really haven't had an opportunity to practice. So practice makes perfect. I always say that. And so we have to give students the time to practice so that they can perform better. Performance is something that we like to emphasize during exams, but if we're going to do that, we really need to give students the opportunity to practice. Just think about, ballet. If somebody's asking you to perform, are you going to be able to dance well? And, if somebody shows you a couple of tips, the answer, of course, is no. You haven't been trained in that, so why should anybody expect you to be a prima donna? It's just not going to happen, right? So it's always important that when you have an exam that you always go back with your freshman and sophomore students, that you go review the exams and quizzes, and always tell them what it is that you're expecting them to do, to remember, to understand, or to apply. Sarah, next.
Okay, so now we have a session breakout planned as usual. With all the information that was provided and laid out, now you can discuss, here are the 2 prompts. So what are the challenges of course design and which elements are essential to an effective lesson plan? So these are some of the questions or prompts that you might want to start addressing in the breakout session. We have a little bit more time allocated this time just because it seems sometimes too little. So we made sure that this time we gave you more interaction possibilities. Now, as Dr. Flores was mentioning, and the mentors in attendance might attest to, is that this is a great planning layout of information, but once you are in the throes of it, things tend to become automatic. And when you have experience teaching, you will see that you repeat the content so much that you put this information aside. Now, remember, the focus of this obviously is that you are starting your career or exploring the possibility of teaching at a community college. And some of these places require, for several reasons, such as maybe a tenure packet or a certification or a state mandate, such as it happens with uploading the syllabus for every semester, for every course you teach. There are requirements that will point you to developing a lesson plan. Or if you are planning on offering a new course, you will need to develop a course. So this is where this information becomes available. It doesn't mean that obviously in practice, those of us who have been in front of a classroom know that you cannot do this for every single session. And once you have that muscle memory, this becomes kind of incorporated into your teaching abilities and capabilities. So with that said, everybody, just as a reminder, please turn on your cameras and enjoy 15 minutes, and I will see you shortly. I will send an announcement when we are halfway there. And I appreciate and kindly thank the mentors in attendance for sharing their information on how they develop courses, course design, and of course, create effective lesson plans, which is the point of our session today, okay? So have fun, everybody. I will see you in 15 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Good. You're muted, Dr. Flores.
Welcome back.
There we go. Welcome back, everybody. I hope this session was useful and you had an opportunity to share some thoughts and maybe your own experiences as TAs or RAs and how you see things from a different, hopefully, perspective on what it is about course design and lesson planning that pertains to our presentation today. So let's take it back to Dr. Flores for a few reflections and comments before we finish.
Thank you, Sarah. So this is the Zen part of the presentation, okay? You need to give yourselves time to evaluate and reflect upon your own work. I always find it very enjoyable when I get feedback from students regarding activities and teaching style. Um, they have plenty of comments once you open that door and ask them for feedback. And take note. Now, of course, you can also set targets for learning outcomes. When you're evaluating your work, you want to be able to have some number associated with the learning outcomes. So if I set 4 learning outcomes for the semester, then at the end of the semester, I'll check based on the exams. Okay, there may be some specific problems that address some learning outcomes and other problems that address other learning outcomes. So I make sense of those problems or activities or assignments, and to determine what percentage of the students actually showed me beyond any doubt that they have learned this particular outcome. Okay, my goal is always to ensure that about 80% of the students get any one of the outcomes. Okay, this is not about grading them. This is about just me getting a sense of what learning outcomes are more difficult and how much time I need to spend on them accordingly. So it helps me plan ahead. I collect data on student performance so that I can determine the percentages, okay? But I also assess whether students are ready for the course at the beginning of the semester, what their needs may be, and what skills the students bring to the table or they need to acquire. Okay, I'm notorious for assigning MATLAB exercises. MATLAB is a mathematical platform that engineers use. And Every semester, I hear the comment from the students, we should have a course on where we actually learn how to use MATLAB. And my response is, no, we don't need a course for that. That's what we're doing in this class. You know, you're learning MATLAB on the side so that you can solve problems. You know, you don't have to spend a semester learning how to use the ruler. You have to use the ruler in courses so that you can measure things, right? Uh, that's my attitude, but you know, it's always important to get that feedback from students, and maybe they make corrections, you know, when it comes to attitudes. Um, you should take time to determine which parts of the course worked, and also determine what didn't work. You know, when you found that certain things worked very well, that's an opportunity for you to say, okay, I'm going to do that again because it worked. But if something didn't work, don't repeat the exercise because probably it's not going to work. You need to modify it. You need to think about how you can improve what you did so that it does work next time. And lastly, I will say that you have to take feedback that you get from other people, whether it's from students or colleagues or your boss. Always take everything with a grain of salt. Do you know what that means? Take everything with a grain of salt. Are you familiar with that phrase? Luis, you're familiar with that? Christian, you know what that means, right? So, you know, the Romans used to put a little bit of a grain of salt in their wine because they felt that if the wine was poisoned, that the salt would reduce the effect of poison, right? So that is to say that sometimes the comments that you get are a little bit poisonous, and you have to be prepared for that, right? So you don't die. You're never in a situation where you're gonna die just because you listen to people. You should listen to people and say, okay, well, yeah, I accept that, but you know, I'm not going to kill myself over that because I can improve, right? And stay positive, right? Always stay positive, always stay curious, and you know, that's the secret for success. Sarah. Okay, one last thought, and I'm going to finish my monologue here. You're going to hear a lot about academic freedom. Okay, many professors, many of my colleagues talk about, well, you know, you're infringing upon my academic freedom for selecting this textbook or talking about this in my class. Academic freedom means something very specific in the United States. Okay, and this is there's a legal background associated with this. The Supreme Court defines academic freedom for institutions, not for individuals, but for institutions. And what it means is that an institution can determine on some grounds who gets admitted to university or community college, who among the professors get to teach, who may not teach. That's called credentialing, right? In a community college, you may not teach unless you have a master's degree and you have at least 18 hours of credit, of graduate credit in the discipline that you want to teach. So there are requirements. So that goes into item B, who may teach. C has to do with what may be taught, and D is how it should be taught. What may be taught typically in a community college is prescribed. If you're a professor at a community college, you will be told this is what you need to discuss or teach in class. In a university setting, typically at the senior level or at the graduate level, there's much more freedom as to what we may teach, because we decide, since we're at the forefront of advancing knowledge, that these are the topics that are important for our students. These are the subject areas that our students need to be exposed to. And how it should be taught, that is up to you for the most part, okay? There may be some recommendations, but for the most part, that one falls on you. So that's why I think it's so important that you have lessons planned, because that's where you decide how you're going to be teaching. Okay? Professor will always have some degree of freedom in the classroom in discussing their subjects. That's undeniably true. But you need to understand that in a university environment, uh, there's politics at play. And so man is a political animal, woman is a political animal. And when we are in a political environment, we need to agree on certain things. We need to discuss them. And as long as we know where we stand, I think everything is going to be fine. All right. And that's all I have to say for today. So thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. I hope you learned something. Um, there's plenty of information out there, and I know, Sara, we have one last slide, right? You want to talk about that?
Yes, Dr. Flores, thank you. We have added a couple of links. As you know, we upload a copy of the presentations in your Blackboard shell, and also the video in case you want to revisit, or if you missed one of the sessions and you want to listen to it, you can do so following the links provided in Blackboard. So I won't go into detail of this. They're available for you in the copy of the presentation, but additional resources regarding today's topic. So does anybody have a question, a comment, or anything else before we adjourn? Thank you to the mentors who attended, and as always for contributing to the discussion in the breakout rooms. So anybody, any comments, Agni, anything that I am not remembering?
No, I don't. Not that. I just wanted to add that just like the teaching philosophy over next week, as you start looking into your lesson plans, we will also put an additional session under the resources, a section which will have similar sort of resources like we had for the teaching philosophy, along with the resources which Dr. Flores just mentioned. So just that, I will send out an email saying that they're live on Blackboard.
Okay, thank you, Agni. Anything else? Okay, well, I want to thank everybody again for your time this afternoon. We have one more session of professional development scheduled in 2 weeks from today, same time. I will send the links and the reminders. Agni will take care of that. So we have one more to complete our cycle before our closing ceremony. So we know we're approaching semester burnout. So keep pushing, keep being present, stay safe, and thank you so much for everybody, everybody's time today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
faculty, for being here. Bye.